Thank you for joining the Forward for the first in what we believe will be a weekly series or a weekly, almost like a show. I feel like this is sort of a DIY radio or TV show in our new normal. We're going to wait a few minutes to start the formal program, but I'm here on my porch in Montclair. We have Kandel of BBYO, who's in his house in Washington, and Andrés Spokoiny, whose name I can never pronounce perfectly, who runs the Jewish Foundation in Brooklyn. We are waiting for Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum of CBST, who I think should be joining us any minute. And we know a lot of you are just signing on, and here she comes. Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum is joining us from her home, or maybe her show. Hi, Sharon. You got to turn your audio on. We're going to have a little bit of a soft start here, just because I know people are getting used to the tech, and so I thought we'd just chit-chat for a second before we formally start what will be an informal conversation anyway. So Sharon, are you calling in from, you're in Brooklyn too, or where are you?
No, I'm in Inwood, Manhattan.
Oh, Inwood, okay. And for those of you who are not New Yorkers or so you know, we definitely plan to have more guests from around the country in our following events.
This is a great idea, by the way. Wonderful that you're doing this.
Yes. And Rabbi, we're neighbors. The Jeff and office are in the same block as CBST.
That's correct. That's right. And here we are. We meet this way. Isn't the world a crazy place?
That's what's going on everywhere, though, right?
No, it's true.
Finding that, my personal version of this was on Saturday night, my cantor offered a kind of Zoom Havdalah. And me and my family are always like, oh, we should do Havdalah. We used to do Havdalah when we lived in Jerusalem, and my kids, and we sort of don't always get our act together to do Havdalah, but now they're Zoom Havdalah. So a bunch of us signed on. We had our candles, and my message right after was, we should do this every week. Forget about coronavirus. I want to do this when everything's back to normal, because this was the best Havdalah I'd had in ages. And I do think people are finding, we'll talk more about this later, but are really finding some real meaning in the new ways of connecting. So it's exciting in a way.
In my case, it's kind of funny. Like my mother sends me all these things for, online theater plays. And I go like, Mom, I never go to the theater in person. Like I go now online, or people that are connecting with me via Zoom that I haven't spoken to in 10 years, that now are in quarantine and they're bored. I say like, dude, there was a reason why I haven't talked to you in 10 years.
All right. Well, I think we can just take that as a segue to get started, because I've been thinking a lot about, we've all been kind of both trying to do this new normal and analyze it and understand it at the same time. And what's interesting to me about our conversation, our panel today, our conversation today, is we've got leaders here from really different parts of our community. We've got, of course, a synagogue rabbi, Sharon Kleinbaum. We've got Kandel, who runs, I think, the largest Jewish youth organization in the world, and Andrés, who runs the Jewish Funders Network, and it really has this view both of foundations and donors and nonprofits, and of course me, who runs a news organization. And those things normally sit in really different kind of lanes, and yet it feels like right now there's we've been talking about flattening the curve, but I feel like we're flattening the organizational structures too, because in some ways all of us are actually trying to do the exact same thing, which is build community. And that's always part of what we're doing, but now that's the essential thing we're doing. And I've also was thinking about what I'm seeing from the three of you and what we're trying to do at the Forward and what we're seeing out there broadly in the Jewish world is really an interesting process about innovation and how it's happening kind of at warp speed. And I've been thinking a lot about innovation since I left the New York Times last summer to run the Forward and to kind of reinvent it in the digital space. I've been talking a lot about my old boss, Dean Baquet, the editor of the New York Times, and his framing idea around innovation is that you have to learn to distinguish between traditions and habits. traditions are like the essence of who you are and what you do and what you hold fast to and you'd never change. And the habits are kind of like the way you express them at the moment or on the certain platform or at a certain time, or because of the structures or the strictures, the restrictions you have on whatever. And the habits can change as long as the traditions hold fast. And it's funny to think about this, and I'd be interested in Rabbi Kleinbaum, particularly your take on it, because it's so parallel to kind of halacha and minhag in Judaism. But what I'm realizing now is that now more than ever, we are figuring out what's the essence, what's the tradition, what's the root of what's meaningful in our organizations, in our families, in our exercise lives, whatever, and then finding that you can find lots of new ways to kind of express them. So that's my opening salvo. And I actually want to start with each of you just saying a couple words about, who you are and what you do, and maybe something about something you've discovered in the last few days of this new normal that was actually like better than you thought, or a surprise, a delight, something you found in the sort of silver lining of the pandemic. Why don't we start with you, Sharon?
Well, you know what? I have to close the door. My dogs are barking, which is a whole new part of, a whole new part of doing this.
No
Well, I have to say, in terms of the delight thing, I'm now teaching a Psalms class every morning. And, 125 people are gathering every single morning to study Psalms with me. And it's just from California to New York, Jerusalem, I've always been a little bit of a technophobe. And so this is pushing me personally to embrace it as a platform to reach people. And to be able to teach Torah and engage in really profound and deep learning via this platform, and we were able to put it together so quickly. It's very exciting.
Great.
That's astonishing to me.
How about you, Ian? What's something that you found that you didn't expect? Some good news.
I don't know that we didn't expect it, but it's really been great to see affirmed just the spirit of camaraderie that exists both within our agencies that we respectfully work for and across the community. I've had the great fortune, because of the things that we're rolling out, to speak to colleagues at maybe 40 different agencies over the last 4 or 5 days, and everyone just has this this approach right now that it's not about brand or reach or turf. It's like everyone wants to just be collaborative and a part of where things are. And on the flip side, to see that our constituencies, young people, families, adults, even early into this situation, are like prioritizing community connection as much as they are food, shelter, contingency plans. And it's great to know that we are as relevant as we hope to be with them, and that we're as prioritized as they are for us, that we are for them.
Great. One of our attendees jumped right in when Rabbi Kleinbaum was talking. Harriet Prensky was saying, can we send out the link so that more people can join your classes? And we will follow up in an email to all the participants here and anyone who signed up with links to that, as well as other things that get mentioned in this conversation. So over to you, Andrés. What's been your little insight in the last week?
So we work mainly at the Jewish Funders Network. We mainly work with philanthropists and funders. And what's been surprising is how many of the conversations that we were having about good philanthropic responses in general, not just in a crisis, but they're much more important in a crisis, all of a sudden reach a tipping point. Like, so for example, for years we were talking about how important it is for funders to give undesignated funds to nonprofits. Now, because of the crisis, everybody says we need
funds means you can use it for whatever you want, right? You don't
have exactly. Now funders tend to say, oh no, I'm giving you, but I'm giving you for this or for that. Now, with the crisis, people realize that you can't place more restrictions on nonprofits. Nonprofits need to react fast. Or for example, funders that are saying, you know what, forget about this lengthy report that I ask you. I know you're busy. So it is as if we needed a crisis to realize that many of the funding practices were not being very helpful. So that I think it's very important. And I think that there is an element of humility that this brings. And, funders and big donors there's a stereotype out there, I don't know based on what, that they're not the most humble people out there. But the truth is that faced with this crisis that is unprecedented, that is we really can't do anything against, it's really give you some humility, and that humility reverberates also in the way you realize you relate with your grantees and with the community as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most interesting things, depending on how long this goes, et cetera, is really going to be not only how we handle this, but how it changes us and changes our organizations and changes how we work together. So for those of you who've just joined the call, I know we have many people from around the country and maybe around the world. We have Ian Kandel of BBYO, Andrés Spokoiny of the Jewish Funders Network, and Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum of Congregation Beit Simchat Torah in Manhattan. I'm Jodi Rudoren. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Forward. We're going to keep talking now about the Jewish community's kind of innovations and responses to the crisis. We will be taking some of your questions, which you can post by using, there's a Q&A button in the bottom left-hand corner, I think, of most of your screens. Don't worry, if you click on that button, it won't stop the recording or disrupt it in any way. Stop the video or disrupt it in any way. Just hit the Q&A. You'll be able to type your question in. I'll see it, and then we'll surface those as the conversation goes. We are going to also be recording this conversation and sharing it out on all of our platforms and our lists, so you can share it with your friends. So let's get into it. Ian, I want to start with you. Tell us the story of, so in the last nanosecond, the BBYO has created a new platform. You described it to one of our reporters last week as the Netflix of Jewish content for youth, I think. And I want you to walk us through a little bit how that happened. When did you start thinking about it? When did it go live? What's been going on since it went live? How many people are participating? So just tell us a little bit about the background and how it happened.
Sure. So we've been monitoring the coronavirus situation for quite a while now. It really ramped up in China around the time of our international convention, and we were bringing thousands of kids from all over the world together. So we were monitoring it for about 6 weeks. And then about 10, 12 days ago, our CEO made some wise decisions to bring our leadership together and dole out responsibilities about business contingency plans and how we were going to handle the summer, which we're very focused on, and how we're going to sustain chapter and regional programming if there were disruptions based on what we knew the virus to be then. And we started about, I would say, last Monday or Tuesday, I circulated a Word document, no longer than a page and a half of bullets of just signature templated experiences that our communities could run digitally for a brief amount of time if there was an interruption in any kind of programming. And then when we saw that this thing was going to be much larger, much bigger, much more broad, our program team began to meet. And Wednesday night, Thursday morning, we leaned from a Word doc into a website, and we built the new platform. It's called bbyo.org/on-demand. We made it live Saturday evening. We are established really great partnerships up and down and left and right of the community across all denominations. Many of the youth movements in North America and around the world, including NIFTY, NCSY, Moving Tradition, European Union of Jewish Students, Hebraica in Argentina, ZVST in Germany, Maccabi Tza'ir in Israel, they're all moving their programming or parts of their programming, part of it. And
Ian, sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to jump in here to say I logged on today, and I was just today you got a discussion on anti-Semitism, excuses, causes, and myths, juggling with Sam, NFL free agency, Argentina combating anti-Semitism. That discussion is going to be in Espanol. You've got trivia, you've got a silent disco, a study hall, something about U.S. elections and the media. I mean, this is like spanning the gamut of anything a teenager or frankly an adult might want to do or talk about. I think there was an Israeli cooking class, which I'm planning on signing up for. It's like the diversity and range is, And it's interesting because you're like, we're just going to do everything. And then it's about the curation, I guess, about how do you make sure people see it, what they're interested in.
Well, classic to BBYO, we're building a platform and the teams are driving the process. So since Saturday night, we've received about 300 program submissions for live programming hours across the next couple of weeks. We are inviting all educators, musicians, teachers, artists, whomever that wants to offer programming to submit. But most of what you're seeing there are teams building and sharing experiences for each other across the tools that we've offered.
And what are you seeing so far in terms of usage? Obviously, it'll grow over time, but.
Since Saturday, we've had just over 18,000 visits to the site. And as I said, we've received about 300 programs. Where some of the sessions have averaged from 7 people to a few hundred. And so it depends on who's hosting, how effective they are in promoting their own, just like a media market.
Yep. Yeah.
So if I may jump in here for a second, I mean, I think that what Ian is saying, and what you, Jodi, are saying about platforms is very important, because you mentioned these are transformations that are going to carry on after the crisis. And one of the transformations that we've been seeing in the last decade in the Jewish community is that the organizations that do best are those that are actually platforms. They are not traditional organizations. Now, we see this in the general society as well. The largest taxi company doesn't own a single car. Uber and Lyft, they own the platform. Airbnb, the same, they own the platform. So I think that, and this process was also happening in the Jewish community. I think that now this crisis is actually catalyzing that movement from traditional organizations to platforms. So you're going to have folks like BBYO, but many others, like PJ Library, for example. They have a platform, a program that gives books to hundreds of thousands of Jewish families in the country. So that's a platform. Now they can use it to build stuff on it. So there's going to be, I think, as we go out of this crisis, hopefully, a realization that eventually platforms are more important than top-down programming models.
I think that's a great point. And I think the other thing that Ian pointed out when he was first talking about the way that is about collaboration versus competition. I mean, I feel like, sometimes it just feels like we have more organizations than we need. I remember actually, I belong to a Reform synagogue, and months ago, somebody was saying, why Nifty and BBYO? Which one are we supposed to join? And, the sort of fundamental Americanness of having this menu of options of, 42 different kinds of cereal, and the Jewish organizations have a similar parallel. But, what is that? How does that help people? Really? Sometimes the choices are overwhelming. Right now in this moment, I think the thing we as a news organization are finding is people need curation and help filtering information. We've started a thing called the Daily Distraction, which is kind of three cultural things that you might check out. We're putting together a reading guide. We have a guide of resources. We're trying to put together now a online guide for where you can get Passover food. People need help navigating the choices. And I just think about it from my perspective, obviously as a news organization, but for so long, news organizations have thought about themselves as competing. But now we've had, almost half of the journalists in America have been laid off in the last 10 years. The jobs have restricted. There are all these cities without Jewish news organizations, without news organizations. So what we need to think about is if we can serve readers best by working together, by collaborating, not competing. And I think that's another thing that's going to come out of this.
And I would also say that, larger organizations or those with platforms or resources have an opportunity to lift those smaller up. And we did not build this for BBYO's benefit solely. We had partnerships in mind from the very beginning. And I think any community organizations or institutions right now that have the ability to sustain what was seen as their community and others, it's all one, and we have an opportunity to lift everybody at the moment.
Sharon, I'm going to turn to you, and I'm also going to say, if you're on the chat and you're not from, if you're on the call, go ahead and use the chat to tell me where you're from. I'd love to see the kind of range of people we have, and then I'll surface that back to people. But Rabbi, I'd love you to tell us a little bit about how has looked from your community's perspective. You've got pastoral responsibilities, communal responsibilities. You wrote very powerfully for the foreword about the ways in which the AIDS crisis informs your thinking as we enter this situation. I'd love you. There's quite a lot of territory to cover, but jump in and just tell us what the last week has been like for you as you've tried to figure out what it means to be a rabbi in this moment.
So I think there are a lot of profound challenges for us. And I think in many ways our community is well positioned to understand what they are. There are many ways that this is different than the AIDS crisis, but our synagogue itself lost 40% of our congregation died from AIDS. And that is not really understood by the larger community. And that profound reality has totally shaped us in all different kinds of ways. So first of all, we're dealing with, and every synagogue community is likewise dealing with, what does it mean to shift the understanding of community from being an in-person experience to helping, how do we negotiate the online world? And especially since some of the most at-risk people are the least comfortable with that online world. If you're talking about older people, how do we get people, honestly, from my age and up, to be comfortable seeing that it's possible to connect via a medium which is new and awkward and not natural? And that's a big challenge. Many of our folks who are the most in need of community have the most difficulty with online platforms. That's just a given. And every synagogue community I know is now dealing with this. So that's reality for all of us.
Yeah, one of the questions I was going to ask, actually, thanks to my boss that is listening in from down the street here. She was wondering, I mean, you all serve kind of different age cohorts, and wondering what you're seeing in the generational differences in responses from kids, from middle-aged or parents with young kids, maybe from older folks. You could talk a little bit about that. That would be great.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Sharon, go ahead.
Yeah. So I have to say there are a couple of different pieces to that. One is that, first of all, we're in New York City, which is in a crisis mode, but not in a crisis enough mode from my perspective. And I think what's happening in Israel needs to really happen here. I think you might have seen the article yesterday in the New York Times about funerals in Italy. We in the Jewish community are not yet, and I think in the general American community, we are not yet focused on how bad this is going to be. We're talking about timelines. We're talking about when it gets better. I think to understand how bad it's going to be, you have to look at what's happening in Italy today. And you can see that in 3 to 6 weeks, that is what's going to be happening here in the United States. And so I think first and foremost, we have to start really grokking that and preparing people for what the emotional and spiritual crisis of what that's going to be happening. We haven't even begun to come close to what the worst things are. And I'm not even talking about the economic issues, which we all see how profound they will be. So I think that the older people are taking it more seriously in our community and are more aware, and the people who are caretakers for older people. And I just spoke to a congregant yesterday whose mother is in a Hebrew home in Riverdale, and she can't get in to see her. And the aide gave the wrong medicine to her. Mm-hmm. And there's not enough aides now because the home health aid business is overwhelmed. Nurses are overwhelmed. And this is at a very simple level of care. This is not a very sophisticated level of care. This is in a Jewish independent living facility in the Bronx. And my congregant cannot get into that facility now to see her own mother and to take care of her.
Wow. So I just want to I want to pick up on that in a second, Andres. I'm going to go to you, but I want to just tell you, because the chat is, we have people from all over the world on this call. We had a question from Uganda already. We have a couple people from Australia, including Daniel Grimberg, who met Andres a few years ago. We've got people from Atlanta. We've got Gail Breton, the associate chaplain for Jewish life at Wake Forest. We've got people from Los Angeles and Boston and Lowell, Mass. and Houston, Texas. A lot of Jewish professionals joining us. West Palm Beach, Florida. I don't know, Daniel Kaufman, whether you voted. You're the president of Columbia Boca Raton. We're doing a story today about when people are actually going out to vote in the primary. So thank you so much for joining us from all over the country and the world. It's very exciting to to be helping bridge those connections. Andres, I would love for you to pick up on what Sharon was talking about how Italy and Israel are taking more aggressive approaches, how you're thinking about that in terms of some of the foundational principles that we hold dear about Jewish life, about American life, and how this crisis is raising new questions for us.
Yeah, I think I'm not. I think that the measures that governments are taking are well advised, and I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not going to comment on the question on the measures themselves. Is it right to lock cities, or isn't it? Do we need a curfew? Do we don't? That I leave to people that know better. I'm just concerned by how easily some values and principles that we hold dear fall when we feel threatened, when we're afraid. So I was thinking this morning, like 3 of the main constitutional liberties in the United States: freedom of assembly, freedom of movement, freedom of enterprise, have been curtailed by a mayor issuing an executive order, right? Or by the president issuing an executive order. Now, probably those are the right thing, and probably we need more of that. But I'm wondering, why don't we ask the question of why don't we asking a judicial review of these measures? Can those measures be done without Congress approving them? In other words, I'm not contesting the measures. I'm wondering, it makes me think of what a society can accept when they feel very afraid. None of us thought that we would see people fighting over toilet paper, right? And we do. So I think that in precisely times of crisis, it's very important to have axiological clarity. In other words, clarity about your values and your principles, and what are the things that you accept and the things that you don't accept. And norms and cultural norms and democratic norms and norms of civility tend to fall by the wayside when we're afraid. That's how every authoritarian regime starts. We are afraid, and somebody exploits that fear and makes us do things that we would never otherwise do or tolerate. So I think that guarantees a conversation. Again, not changing the rules, but at least a conversation about that. And I think that the other thing that I would say is that, following on what Sharon was saying about the pastoral thing. I mean, I think that a plague, if we can call this a plague, brings up a lot of existential questions. And we as a society in the 21st century don't talk a lot about existential questions. We don't talk about the nature of life, the nature of God, all these things. And if you look about the Black Death in the 14th century, what followed it was Dante's Divine Comedy and the Renaissance, and all sort of grappling with those things. I think that our organization, I'm getting a little bit philosophical here, but I think it's important. We need to offer artistic, cultural, spiritual outlets for the anguish, for the very primal anguishes that this crisis brings about.
I think that's precisely what the gay community did in response and during AIDS, and why I think the gay community has in particular a lot of things to teach. We don't even have to go back that far. What happened as a result of dealing with the level of infection and the level of death was profound. And my community was not unusual in New York City to lose 40% of the congregation to die from AIDS. And the creation of culture, absolutely, and thoughtful and deep literature, arts, etc., in response to it. In fact, I just spoke to a member of my congregation who wrote one of the major plays that dealt with AIDS, falsettos. And I said to him, "Are you going to write? Are we ready? Are we getting ready to write the next great American play that's going to be based on what we're going through now?"
Ian, I'm going to turn to you, but first I want to say hi to Wesley from Long Island, who is a team leader at BBYO and is signed on, along with someone from Milwaukee, Denise, and someone from West Hartford, who's a student at Towson, I think is how you say it, University of Maryland, who says she's an aspiring Jewish communal professional. So I hope you all are on your best behavior to make Jodi, her name is Jodi, feel inspired to join our lot. Ian, do you think, I mean, what say you about these existential big questions and how we can make sure we have places to kind of address them, particularly for young people for whom, we ran a piece this morning on a friend, it was actually by a friend of mine from my community whose bar mitzvah is scheduled on Saturday, and so many kids are dealing with not getting the bar mitzvah they expected, seniors not getting the graduation they expected, these kids from Heller High who got flown home emergency, landed this morning at 4 a.m., not getting the semester in Israel they expected. My niece was on Kivunim and is now home in Chicago. This is a major disruption for kids, and as we all know, because their lives are shorter so far, each week or month feels like so important to them. And so how are we going to help them? You've done a lot already on giving them a space to connect and to learn and do stuff, but what do you think about how to work with them on those existential questions?
I think we're doing a lot of listening to them, a lot of trying to understand where it is that they are and where they're coming from. I think that we need to validate that these weeks and these moments feel important. They've looked forward to a lot of them as rites of passage of adolescence forever. Their parents talk about them, their grandparents talk about them, culture celebrates them, and I don't think that we should play them down at all. I think that we need to figure out to understand like what it is that makes these things as meaningful as they are, and then figure out how in a new environment with different tools and different approaches to still deliver some of this meaning at these moments in their lives. The teens that we're working with range from just post B'nai Mitzvah, around B'nai Mitzvah, all the way through into university, and they're all dealing with it in similar and different ways based on what their living arrangement is and how disrupted their routine has become. And we're focusing a lot on making sure that we're giving them as much control over how they spend this time and how they can sustain a lot of what is important to them from a social perspective, from a spiritual perspective, from a material perspective, from a community influence perspective. And we're making sure that we're partnering with them so that if there are things that we can make happen in this tumultuous time, that they know that they have as much resources as can be delivered to them to make it happen. And that's where our attention is right now. They're very attuned to what's happening.
I want to also say, Andres, when you were talking about making sure we don't forget to deal with the ways in which in a crisis we maybe lose some of our most sacred rights and how quickly that happens. I was talking to somebody last week, I think it was last week. Oh my gosh, time is like a whole new paradigm, right? But anyway, about a little bit of the flip side, which is, and we're seeing some of it in your organizations, but the flip side of how quickly we actually seem to be able to address problems that seemed insoluble. So we like airline travel. Yeah, we could radically cut airline travel. And of course, that was part of the restricting movement. But I feel like out of this will come a lot of business trips that didn't need to be made on airplanes will no longer be made. Remote work. Work, something we've been discussing for ages, and everybody's like, sure, people can work remotely, but it's so hard. Oh my God, I prefer to be in person, and people aren't as flexible. And now suddenly everyone's going to have real experience with it. So it is interesting both how quick we are to give up things that we thought we hold dear, and to give up that crap that's holding us back from progress, right?
Yeah, so there's good news and bad news. The good news is that you're absolutely right. We're going to realize that some of the things we didn't need, and we can live without very happily, and they were dragging us down. But then the bad news is that when the crisis is over, we go back to old habits, as you were talking before about habits. We go back to them. But in terms of how certain moments serve as a catalyst for change, I was in Israel during the Gulf War, the first Gulf War in 1991. And it was very interesting what happened there. Somebody, if you remember, it was the first war in which a general in Central Command in Tampa, Florida, or in Qatar could actually give orders directly to the front line, or shoot a smart bomb, 10,000 miles away. That actually showed that much of the middle management of the army was actually redundant. We didn't need them. Now, and that changed all the management theory of the 90s and the 2000s, meaning freer flow of information across, the hierarchical ladder, and it changed organizational architecture. We are going to discover the same thing now. We're going to discover that we don't need so many meetings. We're going to discover that we don't need so many business trips. And probably people are going to restructure based on these discoveries. And it's going to have long-lasting implications for in the way in which we organize our communities. What Ian was saying before about not being competitive, or you were saying, Jodi, about sharing is the new owning, right? Like in these platforms that are thriving now in this crisis, they all have in common that are not territorial. BBYO says, you're a teen, you want to do something, come and do it. Now, that's going to become a norm more and more because people are going to see that it works, right? So the command and control is going to be replaced more and more by collaborate and connect.
So I want to remind the people viewing from all over the world, go ahead and use the Q&A to post your questions now. I'm going to turn to you soon. And actually, I'm going to take from the comments, Larry Mark from @Julicious points out, he's like, this could be, as you guys are talking about, this could be a turning point for a lot of us, more online classes, more ways to connect, maybe saving some business meetings. But what about participation in synagogues in particular? Will we get so used to online services and, as he put it, reduce our panim to panim, face-to-face participation in Jewish communities? So, Rabbi Kleinbaum, I'd love you to talk about that.
Well, I want to just say we're having this conversation as if we're going to be in this situation as we are right now, and then it's going to shift back to what we used to be, and there's nothing between here and there except time. And what I'm saying is that I think it's going to be a lot worse before it gets better. It's not just about the lessons we've learned about online and business travel, unfortunately. And when I say the things that we have to learn from Italy, there are so many funerals now in Italy that clergy can't even do funerals anymore. That religious services for funerals have been outlawed. There are so many bodies lining up, they can't bury and cremate them on time. I'm not just talking about the restrictions that Italy has imposed. I'm talking about the actual death toll that's now taking place and the deep illness that is completely seeped through some regions of Italy and to some degree all of Italy.
But you think we're collectively not taking this seriously enough?
We are not taking this seriously enough. We have not absorbed here in America in a way that we Americans are very optimistic people, which is a good thing in many ways. We have not absorbed, and I think those of us in leadership have to really start exercising those muscles of anticipating the level of illness and death and the destruction of what we are seeing around us. In order to be responsible leaders, we have to be prepared for what's going to come, not just where we are right now. I know this sounds horrible and depressing, but you do have to look at what's happening in Italy now, not just the restrictions they have on movements. And I think those questions being raised are profound and important, and I certainly support them, the existential questions. But the article yesterday in New York Times, it said there's so much death right now that they cannot keep up with the burial, and people are being kept away, are dying without being able to see family members because of the risk of contagion. We are not absorbing how serious this virus is, that until there is a vaccine, we are in this situation. It's not going to go away. And so we have to be thinking about not just how difficult it will be to go back to what we were last week, but are we going to be prepared to deepen where we are, and how are we going to do that on a long term? And this is what I think we have to learn from places like the gay community, which was in that place for 16 years while there was no medicine to stop AIDS. We are facing that until there's a vaccine in this country. It's not 2 weeks, it's not 8 weeks.
So you're getting a lot of support from our audience, people saying Americans are not taking it seriously enough, and the projected 1% deaths in the U.S. Would overwhelm us. I want to remind people on the chat or on the Zoom to use Q&A rather than chat if you have a question. Although also Betty Tiago just wants to say hi to Rabbi Kleinbaum. She's both a member of your congregation and a reader of the Forward, although she says she didn't mean to interrupt, so I just outed her interrupting. But I actually want to, hi, thank you for being with us, Betty. I do want to ask you, Sharon, with that level of kind of exception, realizing what a crisis it is. You know, today is a very strange news day. We have 4 states that are voting in the Democratic presidential primary. It'll be very interesting to see whether and how people actually show up for that, you know, at a time when people are saying, do not go out, go be in crowds, or you're going to go to a polling place. And I think, but there's a bigger question, forget about today. It's just, this is an election year in the United States, a very momentous election year in which, and there's been a lot of political questions around how the administration has handled this crisis so far. In Israel, which is also in the middle of a political crisis, there's been some movement toward the idea of a crisis government taking over. Why don't you start us off, Sharon, because you have some provocative thoughts about how we should approach that in this moment.
We have to step up how we understand the moment in history we are in. We are going to look back in these 3 weeks that we're in right now, which basically started, I would say, on Thursday last week and will extend for the next 3 weeks, as a prose door period, we're in a waiting room. We don't know if we're going to look back on these 3 weeks and say we were not really thinking about the level of seriousness that we are at, or we're going to say, wow, we really dodged the bullet that's now destroying the country of Italy. We don't really know. But as Dr. Fauci keeps saying, we have to anticipate the worst if we're going to have any chance of getting in front of it. And the worst is really there could be millions of deaths here in America, many millions around the world, and our healthcare system could go the way of what's happening today in Italy, which is a collapse. And I think that what should happen is that tonight, I think the 538 has said that Bernie Sanders now has a 0% chance of getting the Democratic nomination. I think they should stand on a stage with all the former presidents at a good 6 feet social distance appropriate, with all of those who have run for office this year, including, by the way, President Bush, and should say, we are in a moment of profound crisis. This is not normal business. This can't be business as usual. I would hope that Bernie Sanders, who's gathered a fantastic following and important things to say, would say at this stage, understanding there's no path forward, I concede the position. I support Vice President Biden being our presidential candidate. And now let us, as the leaders this country needs, stake out what is the way forward. What is the way forward in this moment in history, and who is going to be in real leadership? This is not a time for business as usual. And I would hope that would happen. I would love to see a coming together and have Republicans and Democrats saying this is a moment where we have to take this moment seriously, or else I'm afraid we're going to be looking back on the beginning of a plague that will affect every single one of our families, every single one of our communities, and it will be a very, very, very serious shock to the world.
Andrés, I see you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I guess everybody analyzes what's going on at a rational level and at an emotional level based on mental models that we have. So Sharon,
I'm looking at what's happening in Italy. That's what I'm basing.
Right, but you can also look what happened on the cruise. The cruise was the perfect breeding ground for a virus. Only 20% of the cruise passenger got it. Less than 1% of those infected died. So there are different models, and one of the problems we have is that the lack of information is
absolutely
is really bad. I don't know what is the death rate? That of Italy or that of South Korea? That of China or that of Singapore?
Testing is happening in South Korea, so they
right. So, but I'm trying to say one of the problems that we have in every crisis, but in this one in particular, is a lack of information. And I think that
absolutely, that's part of the lack of leadership in our country.
Right, and I think that working from my perch with funders, one of the things that we're trying to do is, okay, can we at least the information that we know, give it clearly, don't leave in place to rumor, because rumor and spreading of, rumor creates panic, and panic also causes death. Now, in terms of mental models that we have, you relate to the AIDS crisis. Now, when I hear you talking about suspending elections, my mental model
about suspending an election. If Bernie concedes that he doesn't have a path forward, that's the way primaries work. I do not think
right.
it should be suspended.
But there's been,
I totally disagree with you. I totally disagree with
fine.
you. Do not say that I said anything about suspending elections.
Okay, I stand corrected. Correcting.
I agree. No election should be suspended.
Right.
We need right now to instigate and create a write-in form of elections. We don't have the leadership in this country doing that now.
Because
we need leadership doing that.
The reason why, and you didn't say it, so I apologize, but there were people, like yesterday, the governor of, I don't know what state, Ohio, said we can't have the primaries because whatever. Now that scares me because I grew up in a dictatorship.
We have to have write-in elections.
I mean, this is actually what we're kind of saying is we need the elected officials and the leaders of the party to take the response that Ian took at BBYO, which is not to say, oh no, without being able to do it in live, we can't do it, but to say, how can we do it? What's the new habit built around the tradition? I'm afraid that if we go down politics, we'll never get off and we only have a few more minutes. So, and I want to turn back to you, Ian. Diana Clark, who's signing in from London, writes, there's confusion about generational roles. My 21-year-old daughter wants me to comfort her, yet she's beset with worry about my well-being. At the same time, I just scolded my 90-year-old father to stop going out, even as I worry that total isolation will accelerate his decline into dementia. So I wonder, Ian, you're obviously sitting mostly on the young end of that set, but how do you think about the way those generational roles are kind of inverting themselves and how we can deal with it? And I know also all of you, there's a lot of concern around the community, right? That senior citizens who we worry about their isolation all the time, and we create programs to keep them from being isolated, now maybe more isolated than ever. So start with Ian, and then you guys can jump in.
I think that I'm enjoying the conversation between Andrés and Sharon. It's an extra lot of self-discipline without jumping in. I think that in this moment, as people who have influence over lots of networks, whether that be a family, a congregation, a community, we have to be measured in what we have expertise in and what we don't have expertise in. And I think that what we are individually reading or hearing or learning from is what then informs us to share with others. And so there's a lot of opinion and there's a lot of fact in what we're all discussing. I think that what we can all do collectively is to elevate how we're caring for each other. And this woman in London who is caring for a daughter and a father, I think that she needs to listen to what she feels her instincts are at best, informed with the widest spectrum of information possible, and not just only one unique channel or one unique voice, but making sure that we're doing our best to hear from multiple people and multiple sources on things, and then figuring out what the aggregate common information is, like any crisis. And I think in this situation, for all of us as community leaders, we need to make sure that, certainly when invited or when it's appropriate, offer our opinions on either social issues, medical and healthcare, wellness, safety, security, or community design, and also distinguish from more just being people. What I've noticed in the last week across the community, from organizations that rarely work with us, to teams that we know very well, to teams that we don't know very well at all, to my own personal friends and family network, is that everyone's just looking to be checked in with, and everyone wants to make sure someone's checking in on them. And so I would encourage that while we have a global pandemic and an election that's for a country that will have ramifications around the world, and there's so much that we don't know, a lot of like what the Jewish community is really good at good times in good times and tough times, are the things that I think we need to double down on most. And I would say to this person in London, exercise the best care you know how for your daughter and the best care for your father, and there's no judgment around it. And if you need help, ask for it right now.
Great advice. So of course, because we're mostly Jews, I think on this call, we have a lot of questions and really a lot of comments, as is traditional. There is one really tachlis question, which I don't know that we're going to turn to you, Rabbi Kleinbaum, although I'm sure there's as many answers for this as there are rabbis, but somebody is asking how many people you need for a minyan, a virtual minyan, a minyan in a chat room. I would assume it's 10, but I don't know.
So there's a lot of debate and discussion about that. At CBST, we count 10 virtually, and the conservative movement, I know, is going through a process now because traditionally they have to be physically in the same room, but I think they might be changing that soon, though I haven't heard recently. We feel really strong.
If you approve a virtual minyan at all,
I do.
Can it still be 10? I mean,
You're asking me, and I say yes, but I'm just saying I don't represent. There are a lot of rabbis who do not say yes. Just like there are some folks who've argued with me that we should still be having in-person services, that as a synagogue we're giving it up.
And there are places, especially in the Haredi community in Rockland County and in Israel as well. And there are a lot of debates going on, but there are a lot of Orthodox rabbis who are saying you can do minyanim, or people can say Kaddish on behalf of each other, or things like that.
Yeah, I don't know how that's where that is now in the Orthodox community, whether the minyan is counted as a minyan of 10 in the Orthodox world if it's not physically in person. I can't.
Right. I think I misspoke. I think most of these rabbis are ruling that it's okay not to daven in a minyan.
Exactly. Yeah,
don't worry about
and for sure, it's okay to daven. Always Judaism says you can daven alone. But, we have great examples throughout our history of where pekuach nefesh, saving the soul is physical is the most important. The mitzvah is to put the menorah in the window, for instance, on Hanukkah to publicize the miracle. But we're told in the mission itself that if there's danger, if there's a lot of anti-Semitism in the neighborhood, don't put your menorah there. We change the way we behave if there's danger associated with it. And that's why so many of us feel strongly about not having in-person service at this point. In fact, in the 1860s, the very famous Rabbi Israel Salant, who started the Musar movement of contemporary times, he required his congregants to eat on Yom Kippur because of the cholera plague. And he actually made Kiddush in order to say, you have to eat on Yom Kippur to stay healthy.
So we've got about 7 minutes left, and I'll return to some Q&As in a sec, but I just wanted to thank everybody again for joining us. I'm so thrilled with the reach that this is having, and we are going to be doing this weekly with different guests, and we may do more themed conversations.
Great idea.
I want to ask questions I'm going to turn to in a second about the upcoming Chag of Pesach. I think people are really starting to think about that, and I think Alan Divac, I'm not sure where he's from, but he has suggested that we actually do a roundtable with practical, ritual, spiritual, and existential discussions around Passover. So maybe that will be one of our upcoming weeks. Yeah. But I'd love for you to talk, each of you to talk a little bit. I've been hearing, we just had a meeting this morning to brainstorm ideas for Passover coverage. It's clearly, and the questions are, there's so many questions, right? How are we going to make sure we get kosher for Passover food? What should, if a religious person normally would be trying to get rid of all their chametz now, but now they have to stockpile food, how do you balance those things? Yeah. What about people who are going to be alone for the Seder or hosting a Seder for the first time because they can't travel? What's a Zoom Seder look like? What if you live alone and you might have to be telling the story to yourself? So we're going to try to do stories about all of that. But and also, by the way, are we living the 11th plague? That's obviously a very pregnant one, I think, in a lot of people's minds. So I'd love each of you to talk about how you're thinking about that upcoming Passover. Maybe start with you, Rabbi.
Yeah, we're going to live stream it. I'm going to be in the sanctuary with a Seder plate and a Seder table, and I'm going to lead the Seder, but nobody else will be there. And we're going to be sending out materials in advance so people can have the Haggadah I'll be using, so it'll be easy to move through it. And I'm going to teach people how to, because we have a lot of people for whom it'll be new. and we do a Seder and help give people all the materials to make a Seder plate, to do a Seder.
How are you? I mean, obviously you have a couple weeks, but like, that's really weird, right? For you, you're going to lead a Seder with nobody at your table. Like, how are you?
Really weird. Really weird. Really weird. You know, it's really weird. It's what we have to do now. So I'm going to learn how to do it. And it's going to be really weird. But I've been kind of surprised at how much, when I've been teaching classes in these settings, that I've actually felt connected to people. So I'm going to work on feeling connected. I think we'll have hundreds of people participating, and it's going to be weird, but we're going to.
Andrés, how about you? I know you're always thinking about history and ritual and how it connects to our public life.
So I think first of all, I'm personally, with my family, we're gonna have a Seder, and I don't have the responsibility of directly deal with a congregation or with a group of teenagers like Ian has or like Rabbi Sharon has. I would just tell you the advice that I'm giving funders, which is, first of all, focused on the most vulnerable, the people that are going to be left behind, the people that are alone, the people that are going to fall in the cracks of any systemic response that the community or the government is gonna do. I'm very concerned about how little attention is being done to is being paid to, for example, people with mental illness, autism, people that are now cooped up in their homes. In other words, there is what I encourage, for us, doing a Seder via Zoom can be complicated. For some people, can be completely disorganizing at the mental level. So I think that as leaders, we're going to be tested by not how comfortable we made it for people that were okay, but how we facilitate things for people that are really the most vulnerable. So my advice, and I don't have answers, I wish I had more, but there are a lot of experts, a lot of smart people out there, and we at JFN are compiling all these ideas on how to do not just the Passover Seder, but every Jewish program and service in a way that takes care and doesn't forget the most vulnerable.
I should say we've had a lot of comments and questions from our audience here in that vein. People want to know how should we be thinking about the homeless right now? What about people who have no technology and are feeling more and more isolated? How do we serve them? We had a woman from Uganda pose a question about, this is a place where there's no testing and nothing available. How could she help the community there? So as it's inspiring to know that our audience is thinking about that same question too. So we are closing out now, and I know some people are signing off. I want to just say thank you again for coming. I'm going to give everybody a last chance to kind of wrap up. We will be doing these weekly. Please hit us with any ideas you have, feedback about this. You can email me directly, Rudoren, Rudoren, @forward.com. We will also be sending you an email in which to give you a free subscription to the Forward for, I think, 3 months. And we'll share the links to Sharon's classes and to Ian's platform and to whatever Andrés wants to share, and maybe to some of our recent articles. But thank you again for joining us. So let's go around. We'll do Ian, Andrés, and then Sharon. Just some closing thoughts until we meet again, which I hope will be on Zoom very soon.
Great.
I think that what Andrés and Sharon shared about Pesach is important. I would just encourage that we all remind that, like, as a community that's built on history and tradition, we may not have lived through it ourselves, but our community has lived through moments like this or much worse, and we have a lot of power. And I think if we trust in intergenerational cooperation, intercommunal cooperation, we can summon a lot of entrepreneurship and innovation in making sure that, like, those of us that have can share with those that don't have as much. I think that we don't know what's going to happen, but so we should stay connected. We should stay nimble and adaptable, and trust in those that we're supporting and leading to inform us what they need.
I agree. I think that the good thing of being part of a people that is 4,000 years old is that whatever history throws at you, we've been there before.
Yeah.
So, gain some historical perspective. This too shall pass. And I would say that, in this plague, we're all wearing masks, but the plague, what it does is it takes your mask away. It shows who you really are down below. And I think that we're seeing that. We're seeing who's selfish, who's egotistic, who shows solidarity, who cares. I think that we need to show, now that our masks are going to be off, figuratively, we need to choose, each of us, how we want history to remember our attitude. Were we helpful and caring, or were we fighting for toilet paper? I think that keeping that in mind is a good guide to navigate these challenging times.
Wow, these are beautiful things. I'm so honored to be on this panel. Thanks so much for inviting me. I agree with everything you are all saying. And I would just add the exercise, the spiritual exercise of offering gratitude, of no matter what happens, no matter what our days, our weeks, our months, our years are like, or what our lives are like, the ability to be grateful for the things that we have, the people who surround us, for whatever is giving us strength, continues to be the most profound. So thank you, everybody.
Rabbi Kleinbaum, I'm so glad you said that, because this morning I had this thought about that we should really start a gratitude journal. And I was thinking about we should do it in my family. And I was thinking about how we could do it on the Forward platform. Could we invite people to really share one thing every day that they're grateful for? And I'm really grateful to you guys for joining us and for this excellent conversation, for my colleagues, Lisa Lepson and Dina Cooperman, who helped make this happen, whose idea it was. And for all of you who joined us, thank you. Thank you for supporting Jewish journalism. Thank you for being part of our community. And please stay in touch with us. Come back, tell your friends, because we want to serve readers in this time, serve to help stay connected and keep building community. So I hope everyone has a quiet and safe and healthy afternoon and evening. I've got some ping pong and Monopoly booked with my kids, as well as about 402 stories to edit. So I'm sure everybody has a balance of the same, but let's all try to keep those balances, right? And even as we keep our distance, try to stay close in touch with people we love. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Take good care and keep in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.